that we don't just sort of let this be a comfortable companionship relationship. Of course, it's nice to have our beloved as a companion, but at that point, then there's a lot of people in our lives that are companions, so to speak. And I think that what you're really calling out for is companionship a good stage for a marriage relationship? Or is it important to strive for more romance or insights within the boundaries? Yeah, I think there's some interesting things here that aren't answered. So if you're on live or you're watching on replay, you can always add a little bit more detail. I think when you're asking about a marriage relationship, I'm assuming that you've been married for a little while. You're asking about romance and companionship. So it feels like there's perhaps, dare I say, a staleness to what's happening in the relationship. Now, you can be really, really great companions and not be stale. But I'm feeling that there's maybe the word isn't stale. Maybe the word is a stuckness. There's something where it feels like you've both got a little bit of your heels in the ground and you're trying to stand your own ground, and you're sort of saying, well, let's just compromise on companionship for the relationship. And it's so important that in relationship, if this is your marriage, or this is, for others, if this is someone that you've been with and you're committed to, that having the romance is really important. Having the deeper conversations, getting deep into insights. You ask about insights specifically, that we don't just sort of let this be a comfortable companionship relationship. Of course, it's nice to have our beloved as a companion, but at that point, then there's a lot of people in our lives that are companions, so to speak. And I think that what you're really calling out for is a shift in your relationship, something that is taking you guys to a different place, because it feels too comfortable. It feels too laissez-faire. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that in a way that maybe it's tired. Maybe you're feeling too tired to actually do something more than companionship. And while there's times in our relationships where we may have to just sort of dip out of the work together and do the individual work, I would just be cautious that if that goes on for too long, that then you become very, very independent from one another. And it's so important that we have our independence in relationships, and that we're not dependent in our relationships, but it's that real interdependency that's so important in relationships. And that also comes with romance. That comes with the spark. That comes with unity. Now, I know after years and years, sometimes that can be harder to cultivate, that deep spark. But I think if you're really working together in the relationship to cultivate that desire for one another, but also that knowingness of knowing who that other person is, and finding that to be so special, to know someone at a soul level, because there's not very many people out there in the world that you've built that kind of relationship with, because it's something, I don't want to call it special, but I'm going to call it special. And what I mean by that is that it is unique and it is sacred. I think sacred's the better word for that, because special brings in a different connotation that I think we don't necessarily want to deem relationships to be so special. But I think that there's a sacredness because there's a soul bond there. And if you've fallen into just the companionship part, I think that's getting a little bit on the lazier side of what we're actually in monogamous, long-term committed relationships for, because we want to keep going deeper. We want to keep going deeper into the abyss of our fears and of our big love, and of our own quandaries, and questioning about life and why we're here and what's happening and how this impacted me. So if we kind of move into that like more companionship energy, I think it really leaves the doors open for both of you to possibly find someone else. And I'm not saying that to scare you, but I think that just sort of says, hey, we're kind of giving up on us. And again, you can take a pause. So it doesn't mean that you can't go through these ebbs and flows, but I just would caution to get too comfortable with companionship. I think that romance doesn't have to be hard work. I think that sometimes we have to start cultivating it in different ways because we do kind of fall into habits. And so maybe that's another tip for you, is that you shake things up a little bit. Maybe you bring back something that you guys used to do that created romance for you, so that you can easily just fall back into that memory cell of, oh gosh, when we did this, it was so romantic, or it was so fun, or, even reminiscing in those old memories that are super fun and romantic and were maybe in the beginning of your relationship, or maybe at some point in your relationship. That can be helpful just right there and then. And maybe it's that you put together a camera roll, what do you call it? An album in your phone that you put some of your best memories in, and you do it individually. Let's come up with five. Let's come up with 5 pictures from the past that are about us. It's so easy now to do this, right? In our phones, we can just type in people's names and it gives us all the photos. And maybe you choose 5. These are my top 5. And then maybe you choose a day of the week that you say, hey, this is going to be sort of like our date night, or our romance night. And let's just pull up these pictures and just reminisce. So it's not that you even have to go anywhere. And it's not that you have to, create some big date, but you might just have that date where you just talk about the good old times. And maybe there's another date where you talk about what you would like to experience in the future. And maybe you come up with, like, what are 5 locations around the world that you think and I think would be really romantic. And you spend a little time doing that, again, individually. And then you come with the curiosity to your, I'm calling it a date, but it could be a dinner. It could be, but something that you sort of deem as like a special time where you're actually going to take time out to talk about this, and that you're going to actually prepare for it. Because what that does is not just give you something to do, but it actually starts to set an intention energetically in your heart and in your mind to think about the other person, and to think about your relationship with the other person, and why was that memory so much fun? What did they do? Gosh, when you held my hand on the bridge in Venice, or when we had that gelato and it spilled down in front of your shirt and we laughed about it. It's like those little things that can really be fun to reminisce over. And I think sometimes we just don't do that enough. I'm not saying live in the past. I'm just saying reminisce about the good moments to bring back some of that spark, and then talk about new opportunities that can come in the future. But the most important thing is to stay in the present. And to do that, I think what's so easy and can be so fun and yet so difficult all at the same time is to have, let's just call it a tantric date. That if you actually had a date with your partner and you said, we're not going to talk about anything, and you just do some soul gazing. If you haven't done soul gazing, it's super easy. But again, what are the eyes? They're the windows to the soul. So you have to show up, and you have to be present, and you have to make eye contact, which means you can't be looking away. You can't be looking at your phone. You can't be, you have to be present. And in that moment of now, when you're present with that person, then I would allow yourself to just feel into your own body. What am I feeling? I do this exercise not on a tantric level, but on a connection level in a couple of different groups that I go to. It'll often be an exercise that the people running the groups will have us do. And I just find it so fun and so interesting, because a lot of people, depending upon where you're at, it's not a judgment. It's just like, hey, we all have our different things. They don't want to make that eye contact. Or once they do, it just really makes them feel vulnerable. And so that's really the point, is that you want to get to that vulnerable space where you're like, yeah, I want you to see me and I want to see you. And so you can take that moment right there to now. It doesn't require anything but your presence and your desire to want to connect, and feeling into your body and feeling, is there anxiousness? Is there an emotion that's coming up? And you may have no idea why, but I would encourage you to not push that emotion down. So if you start to feel something, especially for the person asking this question, that I feel from the question that there's an achiness in your heart, that companionship isn't enough. And I guess there's a couple of things that I didn't exactly address here, because it says insights within the boundaries. So I think, boundaries can be really great, but I get the feeling when we're saying boundaries that we're trying to build walls. And so what we ultimately want to do is break down the walls. And I know after years of marriage, sometimes that can be a challenge because there's just so many things that have happened over time that we can't even quite get to what they are. So if we spend that time, I think really just looking into each other's eyes and being present with one another, I feel like you're going to find there's going to be some deeper things that come of it. And I appreciate you every week. If you're on with me live or you're watching on replay, you can always go to bethbell.me/question, submit your question there, or put comments in the show and I'll pick them up for next week. But I love having you here with me live. The engagement is super fun. And if you want additional support, you can always go to bethbell.me. There's sessions you can book. There's lots of materials, lots of books that get into deep awakening material, like the Awakening and Healing Handbook. There's the Psychedelics Resource Guide. There's also the Herpes Handbook. And of course, there's the book Angels, Herpes, and Psychedelics, which is all about unraveling the mind to unveil illusion. Many, many things and resources that you can tap into. Until next week, I am wishing you so much bliss and love on the journey. Namaste.